add your name and affiliation to the list of attendees just so we know who's been joining. And I'll pause here for a second for people to add anything to the agenda that they'd like to discuss today. If something comes up later, feel free to interject and we can deal with it then, or we can add it to the end of the any other business section. We do have a lightning talk today from Mesbah, so I'll hand things over to you, Mesbah.
All right, thanks, Dan. I'm gonna start sharing. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm just gonna dive into the lightning talk. So what we want to present today is a feature in Grindr that we have. It's called Grindr test repos. So typically, the tests that we run using Grindr are the tests that are in Adaptium Aqua Tests repo. But the Grindr actually gives us the ability to pick tests that exist somewhere else as well. So for example, we have the Terium build smoke tests in Adaptium Terium build repo. We also have internal SVT tests in the runtimes SVT test repo that we can also run. For an example demo for this lightning talk, I just picked an example from the Terium build repo, which is a Java version. So we have a target called Java version in this particular playlist in functional build and package under the Terium build repo. And the way we run it is we just specify the build, the Git repo URL in vendor test repos, and we can specify a branch if we are using a fork from a developer, and we specify the test path. And the rest is pretty standard. So we specify the build list. So in our case, the build list is going to be functional build and package that basically aligns with the path to the playlist that we want to run in the vendor repo, and the target. So in our case, the target is Java version. Basically what it does is outputs Java version. So if we run this test, I already ran it ahead of time. So if we look at the console output, we're gonna do a search. So basically what Grindr does is it clones the repo that you specify as the vendor test repo, and it stages it under workspace, and it goes ahead and runs the target. So in our case, it's a very simple target that just outputs Java version. So this is a nice feature that we can use to run targets from pretty much anywhere that Grindr has the access rights to check out from. So that was the lightning talk today. Is there any question? If not, then I'll.
Yeah. I just want to add one more point. So for the internal repo, which is restricted access, then user can specify the user credentials for those repo. So example would be if you want to run the test from runtimes /tests, then you do exactly like what Mesbah demoed, but in addition, you need to provide not this one. Actually, there's a user credentials that you need to provide. Yeah, user credential ID right there. Too far. You have to go back a little bit. Past the point. There's a user credential right there. Yeah, user credential ID. That's where you download this. So similar for the internal SVT test repo as well. For in this particular case, because the Tamarind build repo is publicly accessible, so you don't need to. Yeah. So, yep. I think I want to add. Thanks, Mesbah.
Sure. Thanks for that point, Len. Okay, I'll stop sharing and hand it over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Mesbah. agenda back up. So let's take a look then at the recent user-raised issues that have come in and see if there's any that have come in the last week that need some attention or any others that people feel need to be called out. See, Julian has raised a concern about the build scripts. That's the only one that's come in the last week. Is there anything in this list that's older that needs some discussion today? Okay, then we'll jump back to the agenda and we'll take a look at the download trends. As we discussed last week, these continue to be useful for the time being. Eventually, we'll have to figure out a better way to track the OpenJ9 download trends or what data will be available from things like the IBM Semaru open builds. But in the meantime, our access to the Adopt OpenJDK download stats is still useful. We see the same kind of trend that we've seen for the past while, which is that the numbers plummet a little bit on the weekends and then bounce back up throughout the week. Is there anything else about these download stats people want to call out on or have a further discussion on? Jump back to the agenda. And the big item we have, of course, is the Java 17 release coming up. Our code split, as we've discussed previously, is targeted for August the 23rd. So we're asking committers, just a reminder, please don't merge anything that's not related to the Java 17 release between now and then, just to make sure that we're minimizing the amount of changes going in that aren't related to the release while maximizing the amount of testing that we get out of that. So in terms of the milestone plan, I'm just going to pull that up and see. Looks like we're still at 58 open items. So a reminder again to please take a pass through this list, move things out that aren't going to land for Java 17 or things that are not critical for 17. And let's shrink this list down so that we're in a much more reasonable state, given that our code split is, let's track of the, less than a week away. We really do need to get that that list of items shrunk. So please do, particularly leads in various areas, to take a pass through here and work with your teams to get this list shrunk. Is there anything in this list people want to call out or have a discussion on today? Then we'll jump back to the agenda, and one of the long pull items, of course, for this Java 17 release is the OpenJDK method handles adoption. Daryl, you mentioned on Slack that you could speak to the performance results.
Yeah, I can do that. So if you scroll down a little bit, there's a link there that to just a document that I put together this morning, just describing some of the results that we're seeing. Let me just find it myself so I can talk to it. Right. So just a bit of background. So we've been trying to address some of the performance problems with the OpenJDK method handles for several weeks now. In many cases, many of the problems led back to the JIT's inability to inline through some of the Lambda form chains that we see now that it wasn't used to seeing with the OpenJ9 implementation of method handles. And one of the reasons for that is because the OpenJ9 method handles implementation had a lot of help in the inliner. We gave the inliner a lot of help for that. So anyway, we've been making steady progress over the past few weeks on improving the performance of a variety of workloads. We are looking at the workloads that IBM runs internally as part of their JSR 292 performance tests. So these include things like the Nashorn benchmarks. Yes, Nashorn is deprecated, but there is a bit of value in running some of these tests. There are a variety of tests that IBM has written and contributed that that are specific that do use method handles internally. So we've run those, and then there's a Ruby test as well that gets run. So I'll just go through a few of the results here. So overall, things are with Nashorn, things are within the ballpark. Let me just say before I go through these results is that these are actually based on a JDK 11 build with the method handles implementation added to that. That is mainly historical. We do want to get off of that and move up to JDK 17 as fast as we can. It's just because when we started this effort several weeks ago, that was really all that we had at that time was a JDK 11 build. So the analysis has sort of continued on that front. I don't think that there's anything here that's really specific to JDK 11 or 16 or 17. Anyway, things are looking a lot better now. We're in the rough ballpark of the OpenJ9 method handles implementation. As I said, most of these problems that we fixed were within just teaching the inliner to do the right thing and to find the opportunities that it should be finding. There are two problem areas still that we have, but I think we have solutions for both of those right now. So the worst is this test called math test, which was spending a fair bit of time still in the interpreter. We had tracked that down to calls to unsafe get object and the fact that they're not being inlined. But in the last, certainly within the last 24 hours, we've come up with a solution that we think is going to work in this case, and to be more aggressive with the inlining of unsafe get object. In some sense, this test is a bit pathological. It does produce a very, very large method with a lot of different call sites, and the compile time of this particular method is it's over 10 seconds. It's in the 10 to 15 second range now, so which is highly unusual. But regardless, I think we have a solution for getting rid of most of that performance delta. And then the object test, the next largest gap, and it's not the gap that was worrisome, it was the fact that the JIT was crashing every so often, but we've identified the problem there in the last little bit, and we have a fix that we're going to be contributing for that. So on the whole, things are looking much better with Nashorn, and I can say that because originally we were in the 20 to 25x performance delta to begin with, so we're definitely down close to where we think we should be. There are a bunch of these Bumblebench tests as well that we have run. Things look generally okay there. In fact, in some cases, things look really well relative to the OpenJ9 version of method handles. There are a couple of outliers though that we spent some time investigating. The array list for each Lambda bench, that particular test seems to be suffering from an issue where we are not properly consuming some of the profiling information that we have. Not sure why it's specific to this particular test, but we know that it's the profiling information that's causing the problem. We just don't know why yet. So we still need to get to the bottom of that. And when we turn off consumption of JProfiling information, performance comes back and is on par with the OpenJ9 implementation. Dynamic Lambda is another one, but that one seems to be a bit unusual in the sense that most of the time we have on par performance, but every so often the OpenJ9 implementation gets a really good number. It seems to uncover some opportunity, does some inlining, exposes some optimization opportunities that don't normally happen. So we haven't got to the bottom of that yet, but on average, the performance of that is acceptable. And then the other major test that we would run that IBM runs internally is a red-black test under the JRuby framework. That one is failing with a null pointer exception with the JIT enabled. We need to get to the bottom of why that is yet. But before diving too deep into that, though, that kind of leads us into what our next steps are, in that we want to take the fixes that we have identified over the past few weeks and start to get them into the code base. Main reasons for that are that some of these some of these intermittent issues that we're tracking may already be fixed by some of the other work that's already happened in the JVM. We also want to make sure that these opportunities are being realized in JDK 17 as well, because that's ultimately what we're targeting this for. And we want to get better cross-platform testing coverage with some of the things that we have done. So doing things locally isn't really going to do that. So where we are right now is we're shifting focus from investigating some of these performance problems, because we do have a bit of an understanding of where and what the issues are. We may not have a fix in hand, but we kind of know, we understand what some of the deltas are. And we're going to be focusing on getting the changes into the builds themselves. So we have one PR already open, but we need to create PRs for several of the other features. So I expect that over the next few days we're going to start to surface some of those and get them reviewed and push them in so that we can get proper testing with this feature. So. Yeah, and then once that's there, hopefully we'll see, more testing coverage and see how things behave with JDK 17. And if there are still remaining issues with some of these tests, functional issues with some of these tests, then we're going to have to go after and figure out where and what's causing those. So anyway, that's just an update on where things are at the moment. Pause there if anybody has any comments or questions on that?
Yeah, comparison
Go ahead,
between using OpenJ9 method handles versus OpenJDK method handles, but the same OpenJ9 VM. Is that right?
Yes, it's the same base. Yes.
Have we run comparisons of OpenJ9 versus other VM like Hotspot? So if
we have
performance before, and we retain that's good. But if Hotspot is twice as fast, just to pick a number, then that's still not a good position to be in.
Right, you're right. It's not, and I can tell you that that the performance relative to Hotspot is not good in a lot of cases. So our goal with JDK 17 was to get to be in the same ballpark as the OpenJ9 implementation. The OpenJ9 implementation has a number of deficiencies relative to Hotspot that we need to address. I think some of that gap will be easier to address with the OpenJDK implementation of method handles, because there is, for example, some profiling information that Hotspot is even built into the JCL, that Hotspot is built into the method handles implementation that we currently don't take advantage of, but we could, to understand some of the paths that are going to be taking and what some of the optimization opportunities are. So for JDK 17, I don't expect that we're going to be closing any performance gap relative to Hotspot, just to bring us close to OpenJ9. And then our focus after this is going to be on regaining whatever whatever outstanding delta there happens to be relative to Hotspot. So I expect that will happen over subsequent releases.
Okay. The other comment I have is you start out by saying you've done all this testing on JDK 11. The method handle implementation in JDK 17 has not stood still, and so what's your sense of how switching to 17 is going to affect all of this?
I don't know. It's something we're going to have to discover later this week when we do that. the JVM that we're starting with is based on one from mid-July. That's what so we have all the fixes up until mid-July. So if the JCL itself has changed, then yes, there may be some differences that we need to investigate, but we don't. I mean, I don't know what they would be until we actually get into it.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like JDK 17 had 3 years to change how it uses method handles, and so that may translate to.
Yeah, we will be doing some performance testing with code that we know doesn't, or with existing benchmarks that don't use method handles directly. So, for example, we're not using things that are known to be invoke dynamic tests. So we want to see how the performance of those benchmarks behaves. So we're going to get onto that as well fairly soon.
So I think one of those tests should be Liberty Startup that I know Vijay is very interested in. I took a crack at comparing Java 17 to Java 11 with the builds that we currently have, and we see a 9% performance delta, meaning Java 11 is faster. So what I compared is for the Java 17, I had a nightly build from August 11, and this was marked JCL plus 35. I'm not entirely sure whether this JCL includes, or this build that I took includes the new method handle implementation. I thought it did, but I'm not sure. And frankly, it's not clear to me how to build Java 17 correctly with the new method handle implementation. So I do have a build, and I understand that I have to take that branch OpenJ9, what is that, dash something, staging. But when I profile that build, it's quite different in terms of JIT code with respect to the Java 17 nightly build. So in the build that I have, I see a lot of ticks in security methods, in Java lang invoke, whereas if I profile the nightly build, the Java 17 nightly build, I do not see those. It's just a string and UTF-16 stuff. So currently I don't have a handle on how to correctly build, or maybe I'm building correctly, but I have this uncertainty that I'm not running what I'm supposed to be running.
Yeah, I'm not sure is Jack on the call. Are the OpenJDK method handles on by default in JDK 17 now? So if somebody builds JDK 17,
no.
Is that what they're getting?
No, Daryl. Currently, the OpenJDK method handle is only enabled for the OpenJ9 staging branch with 17. So if anyone would want to test the 17's performance against the 16 or other versions, they would have to manually select the OpenJ9-staging branch when they're building for JDK 17. The staging branch is the ones that will have method handle enabled by default.
Okay. Marius, so I mean, we're going to have to keep an eye on what's going on there with Liberty Startup.
Yeah, and I may need some help.
Yeah.
So I'm deep into investigation, but being its optimizer, I don't always know what I'm doing.
Are the method handles your prime suspect?
No. Well, first of all, I see a lot of code in the VM, but I don't know what to improve in there. It's not clear. It's a lot of time in the interpreter, like 10% it is going into the interpreter. And 25% is in the VM.
Okay, I mean, a lot of the changes that we have done in the past few weeks to get us out of the interpreter when we're dealing with method handles go to address, well, they haven't been committed yet, so obviously you're not running with any of those things, right. So that we may have already fixed some of those issues.
Yeah, so I'm keen to try the PRs that you have.
Yeah.
So, Daryl, just circling back to what you were saying originally, you said there's a PR or two PRs that are open or going to be open today. And then there's a number of other changes that have to be stabilized or productized, and there's a number of changes that have not yet been made. They've been identified but not yet made. What's the timeline for getting those pull requests opened and merged?
So just to clarify a bit, we have one pull request that's already open. It's been open for actually several weeks now, to introduce some optimizations for link to static, link to special. We have one coming. So that's the only one that's really open right now that provides any sort of performance. There's been a bunch of things that build on top of that have been sort of developed internally for the past and experimented with and tinkered with and for the past several weeks. So what I'd like the team to do this week is to get PRs open for all the things that we have found over the past few weeks. So my target for this is going to be end of the week, where we get PRs open for all of those. Just knowing the amount of code that went into each of those, I think that is reasonable to do. But I'll know once these guys get into it a bit more. But I think that's our goal is to get PRs opened by the end of this week. Hopefully we can get those tested and merged fairly quickly. I mean, a lot of us has been looking at that code before, so it's not like it's the first time we've seen it. So yeah, I mean, we need to get testing done on JDK 17 just so that we know what problems may flush out from there. So, I mean, the first step in my mind is just getting those changes into the build so that everybody has access to them.
Yeah, I'm just looking at our code split date of the 23rd. If your target is PRs opened by the 20th, they're unlikely to be tested, reviewed, and merged by the 23rd, that code split.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'm going to have a discussion with these guys today. I have a meeting with them today. We can talk through what the realistic timelines are. So what the earliest we can get some of these in by. I know at least one of them, the link to virtual one, is going to be, I've already looked through it once, and Devin's looked through it as well. It's a fairly complex one, so that one may take a little bit of time, and it's unfortunately one that others are building on as well. So at this point, you're right that meeting that code split may not happen, but this is also something that we could potentially dual merge after. Most of the changes here are specific to the inliner, which doesn't change that much. So it is something that we could dual maintain for a little while if we had to.
Yeah, the concern is the divergence. We already asked people to hold changes for 2 weeks.
Yep.
If we do the code split and then do all the testing on the main line, we're going to be missing or testing things that aren't quite matching what we're planning to release. Maybe that'll flush out the issues anyways, but it may make debugging and resolving those in the branch more difficult. So we may need to talk about moving that code split date out again.
Okay, I mean like a week?
Likely. I think we probably need to hear the results from your discussion on how long it'll take to get those things merged. The more accurate timeline we have for that, the better off we're going to be for being able to figure out whether we should do that code split or
right,
and dual maintain or what the approach should be there. So I'm looking for feedback from you and from that meeting on where we should be taking this.
Okay, I'll give you a summary later today then.
Thanks, Daryl. I know we're over time now for where we're at, but I did want to check with Jack on the state of the open issues. I know you've been trying to burn down that list of open method handle VM issues as well.
Yes, Dan. So this week we've been working on getting grinders runs and testing to verify that the PRs that have went in to fix what we expected to fix have been working correctly, and in fact they actually fixed more than what we expected to. Jason have been helping to run a lot of the older sanity tests that have been disabled, and I think right now we've went down to only 3 sanity OpenJDK failures, and 2 of them are intermittent. I think that was like 3 less compared to last week, and we also have closed out about 6 issues related to method handles that either no longer fails or the issue itself is re-enabled and the tests have passed. Right now, I am looking at 1 sanity OpenJDK failure. Also, I think there's another related one in extended that we have identified as being caused by one of the earlier PRs that was related to how we handled the injected invoker. So I'm right now working on that and making tests to see if we can bypass the issue by using something, by adding, I guess, additional checks. Also, we're seeing still some intermittent failures in the special system test failures that we have not yet had time to address.
How many issues?
Yes.
Are you say there's a number of issues that have not yet been addressed. How many issues are we talking?
I think they're all the same thing. We're just seeing it different places with the MP exception.
Is there an issue tracking that?
We have issues open separately for each individual instances that it was observed in different test cases. There's about, I think, 4 or 5 in total.
It might be worth putting links to some of the current issues, because I know we've talked about 3 sanity OpenJDK tests and 2 intermittent issues for a number of weeks now, and I'm having a hard time telling if those are the same reopen issues or if it's new issues each week.
Okay, I will be posting links to the actual issue onto the doc.
Okay, thanks, Jack. In terms of the other major item we've been talking about for 17, Daryl, did the perf items for AR64 get merged?
So we had there's just one outstanding one right now. It was the reference array copy implementation, and the reason that didn't is because we had an intermittent bug with it. But just last night, I think Kono-san fixed it, so it's just undergoing testing right now in the PR, and if that looks good, I think we're going to merge that. Oh, I know we will merge that.
Okay.
And that's it. That's all we're planning on doing.
All right, thanks, Daryl. I know we're over time, so I'm just going to ask, is there any of the items that are left on our list that need to be discussed today? So if you own one of those items and it needs some discussion today, can you please call it out? Sort of page down as we go. Something in this list that needs some conversation today, please call it out. The only one I do want to mention is there is a question about OpenJ9 and Health Center. I've tagged both Mark and Peter in that for an update there because it starts to touch on IBM's plans. But this is something we can have a conversation on in the future. But if you do have knowledge there or opinions, please feel free to jump into that issue too. All right, then. At this point, we're over time, so I guess we'll call the meeting for this week. Thank you to everyone who's attended and for the good conversation about the JDK 17 release. And we'll meet again next week at the same time. So thank you, everyone.